I didn't begin this investigation thinking marble could be shaped like clay. That's ridiculous. Everybody understands that marble gets carved, chiseled, and hammered into form by dedicated hands across months or even years. Michelangelo himself allegedly devoted 4 years to David. And this story is established, recorded, and presented in art history classes worldwide. Yet when I examine the veins more carefully, not the veins in the marble itself, but the human ones, those anatomically flawless veins rendered in stone that seem to bulge beneath the surface, something doesn't add up. The translucent drapery shows the form underneath. Fingers appear to press into flesh as though the marble were genuine skin, and lace veils emerge from a single block while looking weightless, delicate, and frankly impossible. Consider this. How do you actually carve negative space underneath a surface? Create the perception of depth in a material with no flexibility, no give, and zero room for mistakes? How do you make solid stone look transparent when one wrong move with your chisel, one miscalculation, destroys the entire piece and turns that vein into just a groove, shattering the whole illusion? Yet we see no hesitation marks, no corrections, no signs of trial and error, just perfection, anatomical and medical perfection that seems impossible. That's exactly where the accepted explanation starts falling apart. I began documenting examples systematically, not selectively or cherry-picking, and what I discovered wasn't occasional brilliance or rare genius, but a pattern spanning continents and centuries, a consistency that shouldn't exist if we're discussing individual artists working independently with hammers and chisels. Look at Bernini's sculpture of Proserpina, specifically at Pluto's fingers pressing into Proserpina's marble thigh, not merely resting on the surface, but actually pressing into it. The flesh dimples and compresses, behaving exactly like soft tissue does under pressure, and the marble seems to yield, deform, and respond to force the way living flesh would. How is that possible? How do you carve displacement, calculate the precise geometry of compressed tissue, and then reproduce it in an unforgiving medium, allowing no revisions? One incorrect tap removes too much material. The dimple turns into a crater, and the illusion collapses. But it doesn't collapse. Not in Proserpina, not in Apollo and Daphne, where Bernini transforms marble into bark mid-metamorphosis, and you can observe individual leaves emerging from fingertips with botanical precision, and not in the veiled Christ in Naples, where marble becomes fabric so realistic that visitors instinctively try to lift the veil. The veiled Christ is where this mystery becomes impossible to dismiss. Giuseppe San Martino carved, or supposedly carved, the veiled Christ in 1753, depicting Christ's body draped by a translucent shroud, except the shroud isn't a separate piece, but part of the same marble block as the body beneath, one continuous piece. Yet you can see Christ's face through the veil, not suggested or implied, but actually visible. The nose, closed eyes, and parted lips are clear. The fabric clings to the body's contours with gravitational precision, draping over the chest, gathering in the hollow of the throat, and pulling taut across the knees while the folds follow physical laws. The transparency changes depending on thickness. Where fabric bunches, it becomes opaque, and where it stretches thin, the body shows through. This presents a straightforward but crucial question. How do you carve through something that isn't there? The veil isn't real. It's solid marble pretending to be delicate fabric. Creating the illusion of seeing through it requires calculating not just the veil's surface but also the body's surface beneath it. Then somehow removing marble in such exact amounts that the eye perceives depth, transparency, and layering. Have you encountered any strange statues in your city or during your own investigations? I'd appreciate hearing about your experiences in the comments below. The mathematics alone appear impossible for the 18th century, but more disturbing is the physical execution. Because to carve the depression where the veil dips into Christ's open mouth, you'd need to reach through the veil that hasn't been carved yet. You'd need to work backward and forward at the same time, removing material that's simultaneously in front of and behind other material in a sequence that defies any linear process, unless you're not carving at all. But there were those who searched, investigators who couldn't accept the impossible veils and compressed flesh as simple artistic genius. Colonel Percy Fawcett documented stories of a liquid capable of softening stone to clay's consistency, and explorer Hiram Bingham, who rediscovered Machu Picchu, heard identical accounts from indigenous sources. In 1983, a Catholic priest claimed he'd successfully softened stones using plant extracts, but couldn't solve the rehardening problem. The plant's name appears repeatedly, Jotun Pito, scientifically classified as Ephedra andina. Researchers John Peter de Jong, Christopher Jordan, and Jesus Gamarra examined Cusco's granite walls and found evidence of vitrification, surfaces heated to extreme temperatures and turned glassy. Engineer Christopher Dunn analyzed Egyptian monuments and documented precision that modern tools struggle to match, while Marcel Vogel investigated the scoop marks at Sacsayhuaman, comparing ancient capabilities to contemporary stonework. Multiple researchers across multiple continents over multiple decades all reached the same forbidden conclusion. The official explanation doesn't work. Here's the strangest part. Their work never gained momentum. No universities funded follow-up studies. No institutions replicated the experiments. The 1983 documentary aired once and disappeared. Fawcett's accounts got filed away as explorer folklore, and Dunn's precision measurements were acknowledged but never investigated further. The pattern repeats with disturbing consistency. Those who dig too deep either stop publishing, shift to safer subjects, or watch their work dismissed as fringe speculation while the questions remain officially unanswered. The research stays unfunded, and the mystery remains conveniently unsolved. I started examining the tools supposedly used for these sculptures: chisels, hammers, rasps, drills for pilot holes, abrasives for polishing, the same basic toolkit available to sculptors for thousands of years. Here's what's bizarre. The technology barely evolved between ancient Rome and the Renaissance, and the tools Michelangelo used were functionally identical to those used by Roman sculptors 1,500 years earlier, with the same materials, same methods, and same limitations. Yet the sculpture's complexity increased exponentially. Roman portrait busts were impressive for their era, accurate, detailed, and recognizably human. But compare them to Bernini's Apollo and Daphne. Compare static faces to fingers transforming into laurel branches while maintaining perfect anatomical structure at every metamorphosis stage. Compare simplified drapery to fabric so convincing you can identify the weave pattern. The gap isn't incremental or the result of gradual improvement or artistic evolution. It's categorical, the difference between competent and impossible. When you examine the progression and track the timeline, you notice something disturbing. The greatest sculptural achievements cluster in specific periods and locations: Renaissance Italy, Baroque Rome, and before that scattered examples throughout the classical world, like the Laocoon group and the Nike of Samothrace. Works that seem to exist outside their technological context, as if the knowledge came and went, as if it was inherited rather than invented. The pattern doesn't remain confined to Italy. which makes this impossible to dismiss as regional genius or artistic school. I found similar impossible details in the Taj Mahal's marble screens. Jolly work so intricate that solid marble becomes geometric lace with some perforations less than a millimeter thick, where one miscalculation shatters the entire panel. The Temple of Luxor in Egypt features hieroglyphs cut into granite, not soft limestone, but granite, maintaining crisp edges and perfect depth across surfaces spanning hundreds of feet. Chinese Buddhist grottos at Longmen show thousands of figures emerging from cliff faces with identical proportions and anatomical precision, as if stamped rather than individually carved. While the Kailasa temple wasn't built upward, but carved downward from a single rock outcrop, removing 400,000 tons of stone to create a structure with load-bearing pillars, intricate reliefs, and structural calculations that would challenge modern engineers. Different continents, different cultures, different time periods, same impossible precision. The official explanation suggests parallel development, independent artistic achievement, and human ingenuity solving similar problems in similar ways. But that explanation collapses when you examine the specifics, because we're not discussing similar solutions, but identical techniques producing identical results using supposedly identical tools across civilizations that had no contact with each other, and the consistency is unnerving. If you're starting to see the pattern and these questions resonate, consider subscribing to stay updated as we investigate what history has forgotten. Here's where the silence becomes deafening. When you trace back the origins of these impossible sculptures and examine the architectural context they emerge from, you find something unexpected. They appear during periods of radical construction, during eras when entire cities were supposedly built in decades using primitive tools and manpower. The same periods when vast networks of identically designed buildings appeared across continents, when civic structures of extraordinary complexity materialized without adequate construction documentation, when the official narrative asks us to believe in coincidence on a global scale. The structures hint at advanced architectural knowledge. The buildings seem inherited rather than invented. The infrastructure appears complete rather than evolutionary. The world that some researchers have begun calling Tartaria, not as a specific empire because the evidence is too fragmentary for that, but as a placeholder for something we've lost, a previous iteration of civilization, a global culture with technological capabilities we no longer possess. The marble sculptures fit this pattern, representing a zenith of technique that appeared suddenly, flourished briefly, and then declined without the knowledge gradually developing. It was there, complete, and then it faded. By the 19th century, sculptors were already struggling to replicate the effects of Bernini and Michelangelo, and the techniques were being lost in real time. By the 20th century, they were gone entirely, and modern sculptors work in the shadow of achievements they can't reproduce. We're told this is normal. Artistic knowledge is fragile. Techniques get forgotten. Masters die without fully training apprentices. But this many techniques, this completely, with no written records, no preserved methods, no intermediate steps showing decline, the pattern suggests something more deliberate, a discontinuity, an erasure. I searched for documentation, detailed accounts of how these sculptures were created, artist journals describing their methods, workshop records showing time expenditure, tool usage, and material costs, and what I found was silence. Michelangelo left behind sonnets, letters, and contract disputes, but virtually nothing about his actual sculpting technique, and we have more documentation of Renaissance painters mixing pigments than we do of sculptors working marble. Bernini's workshop produced masterpiece after masterpiece, yet we have no detailed account of his process, No apprentice wrote a comprehensive manual, and no patron commissioned documentation of technique, as if the methods were deliberately not recorded, or as if the records were removed. When you examine institutional archives, art historical records, and museum documentation, you find the same pattern: description but no explanation, admiration but no instruction, wonder but no understanding. The establishment acknowledges the mystery of marble that appears soft, veils that seem real, and anatomical precision that defies logic, but then moves past it as if the impossibility is less important than maintaining the narrative. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The gap between what these sculptures demonstrate and what our historical timeline allows, the consistency of technique across impossible distances, and the sudden appearance and equally sudden disappearance of capabilities that surpass what we can achieve today with powered tools and computer modeling. But here's what makes this more than speculation. The sculptures still exist as physical objects you can examine, measure, and analyze, not as theory or legend. When modern material scientists study them, not art historians but engineers and chemists, they find anomalies like certain sections of marble showing different crystalline structures than the surrounding stone, as if they were formed under different conditions, or reformed microscopic analysis revealing organic compounds integrated into the marble matrix at the molecular level, not on the surface but within the stone itself. Tool marks that don't match any known chisel pattern, and surfaces polished to tolerances requiring sustained pressure and heat that hand tools cannot generate. None of this proves molding definitively, but it raises questions the official explanation cannot answer. Why would marble contain organic compounds unless something organic was mixed with it during formation? Why would crystalline structures vary within a single sculpture unless different sections underwent different processes? Why would tool marks be inconsistent with documented tools unless different tools or methods were used? We haven't even addressed the scale problem. Some of these sculptures are enormous. The Trevi Fountain, the Fountain of the Four Rivers, installations requiring multiple figures, all with the same impossible details, all completed in time frames that seem absurd. Bernini supposedly created the Four Rivers Fountain in under 2 years. 4 massive figures, dozens of animals, intricate rockwork, water engineering, and architectural integration, all while maintaining the quality that makes individual fingers pressing into stone look soft. 2 years with hand tools, with marble that fractures unpredictably, with no room for error. Or take Apollo and Daphne, which Bernini completed in 3 years while simultaneously working on other commissions. A sculpture showing 2 figures in motion, with Daphne's fingers becoming leaves, bark spreading across her skin, her hair transforming into branches, and Apollo's hand touching skin that's in the process of becoming wood. The transition zones alone should be impossible. Those areas where human flesh becomes tree bark, where the material properties would be shifting and where a chisel would encounter changing resistance. Unless the material was uniform when worked, unless it was all equally soft, equally moldable, equally responsive. By 1800, the capability was declining. By 1900, it was effectively gone, and modern sculptors can create impressive work, beautiful, technically accomplished, worthy of admiration. But they cannot create veils that appear transparent, flesh that appears compressed, or veins that bulge beneath marble skin. The techniques didn't evolve into something else or transform into modern methods. They simply stopped. The establishment explanation cites changing artistic tastes, the rise of new movements, and economic factors making marble work less viable. But taste doesn't eliminate capability. Fashion doesn't erase technique. and economics don't make knowledge vanish. What makes knowledge vanish is deliberate suppression, institutional control of information, and the systematic removal of inconvenient evidence. When you realize how much architectural and technological knowledge disappeared in the same period, atmospheric engines, hydraulic systems, construction methods that produce buildings we can't replicate today, the marble techniques fit a larger pattern, a pattern of inheritance followed by loss, of capabilities that shouldn't exist in their historical context, of evidence suggesting we're living in the aftermath of something greater. The most unsettling aspect isn't what we don't know, but that no one seems to be asking. Art historians marvel at these sculptures, but don't demand technical explanations. Engineers recognize impossibilities, but don't challenge the official timeline. And institutions preserve the works while avoiding the questions they raise. It's a collective agreement not to look too closely, not to ask how, not to examine the gap between capability and explanation. Because once you start asking, once you follow the evidence where it leads, you arrive at conclusions that destabilize everything. You arrive at the possibility that we're wrong about our own history, that the timeline is compressed, distorted, or deliberately falsified, that previous civilizations achieved things we're only now beginning to understand, that the sculptures weren't carved, but were molded or formed through processes we can no longer comprehend, that the knowledge was inherited from something that came before, something that left traces worldwide, something we've been taught never existed. So I return to where I started, to Moses's arm, to those impossible veins. And I don't have definitive answers, but questions that compound rather than resolve, patterns that repeat too consistently to dismiss, and evidence the official explanation cannot accommodate. I have sculptures that shouldn't exist if our understanding of history is correct, capabilities that appeared without precedent and disappeared without explanation, a worldwide consistency suggesting coordination on a scale that's difficult to accept. And I have the uncomfortable awareness that we might be living in the ruins of something we don't remember, that the masterpieces we preserve might be echoes of techniques we've forgotten, that what we call the pinnacle of human achievement might actually be the remnants of something far greater. The sculptures remain silent, perfect, and impossible, waiting for us to ask the right questions, not who carved them or when were they made or what do they represent, but how were they actually created? Why can't we replicate them today with superior technology? What knowledge was lost? And why was it lost so completely, so thoroughly that we've stopped believing it ever existed? Ask yourself, if the official explanation is true, why can't modern sculptors with diamond-tipped tools, computer modeling, and unlimited resources create a veil as convincing as San Martino's? Why can't they make marble look as soft as Bernini did? Why have we regressed? When you realize we can't answer that question without admitting we've lost something fundamental, when you understand that these sculptures represent capabilities we no longer possess, you begin to see the real mystery. Not how were they made, but what else did we forget? Where are you watching this video from? Write in the comments which city or country you are from. We would love to know who is watching with us. Share your thoughts, observations, or questions. Every comment is important. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Together, we are creating a community of curious explorers.